So we are here with Wendy, Claire Barrie, and Daneen Akers. Thank you both for a presentation that you gave to us a couple of weeks ago, and we're following up with a few questions. My first question for you all is that you both spoke quite a bit about stories, both in the listening of stories and in the sharing of stories. How do we get better at this in relation to our young people? How do we get better at listening to stories of our tradition and connecting them to the lives of the youth in our midst?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And one of the things that I started off with as a sort of a thesis statement is we need to trust stories to do their work. So part of the reason why I think young people and youth ministers have told me that their young people like the stories of holy troublemakers is that we're not necessarily always trying to connect it to the tradition. We're kind of catching a good story that has a value in it that we want, and not necessarily overly emphasizing how it connects to our church traditions, because in some ways I think our young people get a lot of that. They're usually aware when we have like the moral, and
Yeah.
in some ways my pitch is like we can let go of some of that because we're storytelling creatures. Like that is socially how we are wired as humans. The story will do its work. So picking the right story is what I would say is where we need to focus.
I think this is a really interestingly timed question because we are heading into this is Holy Week. We're telling the stories of our faith. The Triduum begins with telling the story of Maundy Thursday when Jesus had his last supper with his disciples and he washed their feet, which is a weird thing. And we'll do that. we will wash each other's feet. We will enact the story. And we have at our cathedral, we have a stripping of the altar where all the choristers, the kids who've been singing throughout the service, will then come and sit right in front of the altar and watch this very moving and dramatic action where everything in the cathedral that's beautiful is taken out and the altar is stripped bare. And then Good Friday, when we bring in this huge rough hewn cross for the Good Friday services. And then we tell the stories of our faith in the Easter Vigil, the great vigil of Easter, which is God's saving deeds through history. And it's all story. And the only preaching is a recitation, a reading of a sermon that's attributed to St. John Chrysostom. So we are living story this week. And then, of course, Easter morning with its really dramatic and beautiful story of Mary Magdalene in the dark, mistaking Jesus for the gardener, which Daneen wrote very, very beautifully about recently. So there's just that I absolutely agree with you, Daneen, that we let stories do their work. And sometimes we do need to let the stories just sink into us. We need to wrap the stories around us. We need to embody the stories, and that's where it happens.
Yeah. And not simplify the story back to what you were saying, Daneen, to make sort of this easy little takeaway. The Holy Week story is not a story that's an easy takeaway. And that's kind of the point, right? The stories that you're lifting up in Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints, these are not easy takeaways. They're not wrapped up in a bow that we can simply take and enjoy. It lets us sit and ponder and wrestle and sort of find our way through. Yeah.
They can be good traveling companions.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.